posted my Klipsch the sevens review, and
Yeah.
that's the one that. So I haven't actually watched other reviewers reviewing that one, but when I reviewed the nines, a
Mm-hmm.
lot of the comments for me on that video were, "Hey, review the sevens because so and so says that they like the sevens more than the nines, et cetera, et cetera." So
Mm-hmm.
I reached out to Audio Advice that same weekend, and they had me a pair like shipped to me almost immediately.
Oh, nice.
That was almost 5 months ago, probably 4 months ago, and I've just been sitting on them for that long. And I thought, well, I guess I need to get this video out. So I finally got up the time yesterday to make the video and all that, published it. But my opinion is that the nines are better. I don't necessarily understand why people are liking the sevens more. If they do, again, this is just third hand that I'm hearing it, but I like the nines more. So
Mm-hmm.
there you go.
Yeah, it was interesting. I watched that video of yours this morning, and at first glance, the response doesn't look horrible. Like it's really
No,
staying pretty linear up until about 1 kilohertz, and then you get that treble rise.
yeah,
So I was like, okay, but it's not. I was kind of trying to get an idea for what you felt about them by kind of reading between the lines, and you're just like, I don't know, there's something about it that was missing, right?
yeah,
And a lot about the measurements is not so much like, the measurements are going to tell me everything that I need to know to make a decision. A lot of it is actually me learning from the measurements and your subjective opinion. So I hear what you say, and then I look at the measurement. I'm like, what about that shows that? Like trying to correlate the two. And the thing that I noticed there was, yeah, it looks pretty, the directivity looks pretty smooth above 1 kilohertz, but there is a big change between 1 kilohertz and what happens below that. Like there's a drastic change.
yeah.
So the in-room response shows that. The in-room response was just kind of very weird.
Yeah, it's like really, it's a very odd in-room response because if you look at the frequency response on axis, even the bass, I didn't realize until I watched the video back that even the bass is tilted downward a little bit, right? Like instead of being completely flat, it gradually drops down, maybe below like 500 hertz or something, and by the time it gets to 80 or 100, it's like a 1.5 dB down. So I'm looking at that, and I'm looking at the rise on the top end, and I'm thinking that's might be also what it is too. Like now that I'm looking back at it, I'm thinking, well, if I had taken the DSP and just bumped up the bass, maybe 2 dB to give it a little bit of a lift, drop the top end down 1 dB, maybe that would have been enough to make me like it, but I'm still not sure. But I'm with you. I don't go into these measurements thinking they're going to tell me everything. And the past couple speakers that I reviewed, like the Don Audio Special or Heritage Specials, my impression hasn't really just made an immediate connection with the measurements. I really have to kind of look into the measurements and try to understand it a little bit more fully. A lot of the times you can pretty quickly like say, oh, okay, this is what I'm hearing. And it shows up in the measurement and here it is. And it's just right there. And it makes perfect sense. But then there are cases like these where it's not immediate and you really have to kind of think about it and go back and listen and try to evaluate things.
So I was looking at this. I'm like, all right, well, that's looking pretty good. It's like staying like for the most part within even 1.5 dB. And then the horizontal directivity looks pretty smooth, right? But then I guess I was, what I'm hearing from what you said and what I'm seeing here is, once you start going off axis, then it gets like it dips. So the moment you start to like toe it out or toe it in too much, now the treble sounds like it's too low almost. It looks like.
Yeah,
is that right?
It's just
it just drops off too much.
Yeah, well, it's relative. Like if you just turn it 20 degrees off axis and look at that measurement, then the response is almost flat. Like it's surprisingly good. But then you look at the in-room measurement, and it just does this weird like dip through the upper mid-range, lower treble. And I don't know that I've seen something do that like as much as this speaker has. It was very odd. So my conclusion was that it probably has something. The reason I didn't much care for it is probably has something to do with that weird kind of dip through there in the in-room response, but also the narrow radiation and the fact that I just came from a speaker that was the total opposite, right? But I like that other speaker. So when I listened to this one with no expectation, it just didn't sound like the other one did to me. So
well, it's good that you also talk about what your preferences are. So you've said it numerous times that you prefer a wider radiating speaker. So the fact that this one is very narrow, like
Yeah,
just
for sure.
right off the bat. Now, the thing about this that I'm looking is like we're always just kind of looking for ones where the on axis and off axis are more similar, right? So it just shows here like it just starts getting real dissimilar, right?
Yeah.
It
Yeah,
gets
even that
very
30
dissimilar.
degrees.
So,
Yeah, that 30 degrees response is doing some weird comb filtering stuff.
oh
I
yeah,
was like,
where's that?
I was like, what the heck is that?
Hey, look, Erin's here. You made it.
Yeah, there he's back. There it is.
Hey.
Yeah, that 30 degrees is like what is happening there? I've never seen that before.
Yeah, I've never seen that either. That's really wild.
Where is that at? Like 18,000? No. Is that a one? I can't tell.
Bottom red color one. Yeah, there's a couple dips there.
Yeah.
So it's some weird kind of diffraction thing, I guess. I'm not 100% sure what causes it. I don't even know if it matters. But yeah, because when you think about, when you're in the room, you hear reflected sound as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
So naturally, some of those things are going to creep into and potentially override. I've had this conversation with the designer recently where he said, I noticed that you tend to say that what you hear sounds a lot like what the estimated in-room response sounds like.
Mm-hmm.
But what I hear is more like the direct sound, so the on-axis response. And I said, yeah, and I know that's supposed to be the case, but I also think that because I'm listening, in a further field, like almost 4 meters away, typically,
Right.
I'm getting a lot of reflected sound. So yeah, that directed sound is there and it helps, if it's good, but if there's some weird stuff going on off axis, almost every time I listen to a speaker and I make my notes and then go back and look, my notes line up more closely with the estimated in-room response than they do the on-axis response.
Right. And with the size of those things, they might sound better as near field monitors, but those are pretty big for a
Yeah, they are. They're pretty big. Yeah. Those JBL 4329Ps you guys talked about last week.
Yeah.
Those are big speakers, man.
Yeah.
And I think those are probably still even bigger than the nines. Actually,
okay.
I'm not 100%
oh
sure.
yeah, I would think so. I haven't seen the nines, but I definitely believe it because they have these big ports in the front, so the cabinet on those JBLs are just huge, and so is the horn loaded compression right. It's like the whole width is the horn.
Here's what's interesting about this, though. I have a quick question about this: is the horizontal directivity looks pretty smooth, but that of course doesn't account for the vertical spin, right?
Right.
And so we always talk about like, I wonder how much that really matters. It's weighted. Like when we look at this, they assign different weights to them. But this is not very smooth.
No.
Right?
Yeah.
So the horizontal one looks pretty smooth, but the other one does not. So does that mean that we should really be paying attention a lot to what's happening vertically also?
Yeah. So when I asked Dr. Toole about that, we talked about the floor bounce and things like that. Like what happens vertically? And I mean, I'm kind of summarizing here, and I may be oversimplifying it, but it was the impression that I got was that, there's just not enough research to show us that it really matters. But in some testing that they did, I guess they somehow removed the floor. Maybe they did it in an anechoic chamber, or they did something where they were, And he said that people didn't like that when there was no floor bounce. It just seemed unnatural. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Well, with the amount of speakers that you review, it's almost like, it's not scientific research, right? It's not controlled, but in that sense, but it's almost like you start getting an impression, like how much do I really care about certain measurements? Like the more I do this, the more I'm like, you know what? I should really be paying more attention to this directivity index.
Yeah.
Like, I notice there's a correlation there with what I'm hearing, what my experience, and what I'm seeing on the directivity index. So and the width, like you've been kind of talking about the width of the dispersion characteristics, and those are things that I don't think I used to pay as much attention to, but now I'm starting to pay more attention to those things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Anyway, thanks.
So that was a good review for me. I like doing those where they kind of like jumble my brain a little bit instead of it matches the measurements and you really don't need me to tell anything about it. It allows me to just kind of go off script, if you will, and it just be honest and be like, this is what I heard, but the measurements look good, or the opposite, and say, These are my guesses as to what's going on, but here you go. And if nothing else, you've got the data. Right? Here's the data, and if you don't want to take my word for it, here's the data.
Yeah,
not like that.
Well, it's important that we always are continually learning and just being willing to change. To me, that's an important thing when it comes to this sort of thing. Is like be open-minded to possibly being wrong, having your mind changed, things like that. So
for sure.
Now, if you can't catch the show, we do have an audio version at anchor.fm/daily HiFi. So make sure to go on over there if you like to listen to the show.